Yes, so we're going to go ahead and record this so that and we'll be able to send out the recording and share it with everyone after. And also we'll be talking, we have some links and everything we'll be dropping in the chat as well. So don't worry about writing everything down, but welcome to UX at UA. We're so excited you're here. We're an exclusive community of UXers that began at the University of Arizona, is open to everyone everywhere. So many of us are based here at the University of Arizona, but we are excited to have people from all over. So I'll go ahead and get started. I can remember how to, there we go. So first off, this is our organizing committee. And like I said, we have people here at the University of Arizona and also beyond. Just a few friendly faces. So I guess organizers, if you want to just like raise a hand or anything, I know a few of us are here today and we're so excited that everybody could take the time and join us for this workshop. So if you'd like to stay in the loop with us, we have our website, ux.arizona.edu, email. We post events on our Meetup and LinkedIn. That's a great way to connect with us. And we also have a Slack channel where we share events. We also share different resources and job opportunities. And if you're interested in getting connected on Slack, you can ask any of the organizers and we can figure out a way to get you in on that. So we have lots of different ways to stay connected and share different opportunities and events. Before we get started, we'll go over our community guidelines. So we're committed to providing a safe and inclusive experience for everyone. We agree to practice empathy, be kind to one another, show respect, follow the rules, and be an ally. So you can read our full guidelines on our website. And one way you can learn more about UX is by getting involved in some of our studies. So you can sign up in a minute and so there are different ways to kind of get involved. So I think recently I signed up for this and I actually was asked to do like a card sorting exercise to help the University of Arizona libraries, which was really interesting. So a way to learn more about UX is to be a participant. And so it's really easy. You can sign up. We'll drop a link in the chat and they definitely don't email frequently, but it's always great to get involved. So please sign up if you haven't already. And we also offer mentoring services. And you can go to this link on the website and you can connect with someone at the University of Arizona or beyond that works in the UX realm and talk with them and connect and network and just learn more to kind of build out your community and see what everyone does. So go ahead and check out that link if you're interested. Another great resource that we offer is the UX cookbook. It's one of my favorites. It's these handcrafted recipes to get you started in everything UX, from user research, design, usability testing, and more. They're always cooking up new recipes, so you can check back frequently. I work in social media here at the university, and I actually use the personas in this to create some personas for a strategy. When I first started, it was super helpful, very easy to use, so please check it out. And let us know if there's anything you're interested in seeing so we can continue to improve and build on it. And so if you have any announcements or anything you'd like to share, feel free to unmute or post in the chat for this group if you have anything you'd like to say. And we'll just give it a few seconds. So then, with no further ado, we will get into our meetup. So today we will be doing a plain language workshop. It's part one of a series in UX writing and content strategy. So very exciting. There's a lot of different things in UX writing and content strategy. So we thought we'd do a series covering a few different aspects, and this is the first one. So today's speaker is Allie Higgins. She's a content strategist here at the University of Arizona Libraries. She coordinates and supports web content projects to help improve student, faculty, and staff experience. She also previously worked as an instructor. And so she has, as a writing instructor, she's a lot of different experience in this, and she's always excited to chat about UX writing and research projects. And we're really excited for her to do a workshop with us today. So this will be a more interactive session, and I will let her talk more about that and get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. I'm Allie. I'm really excited to work with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So is that okay? Cool. I know we did some introductions when people were coming in, but I always like to start with sort of a moment for everyone to learn why they're here, what they're interested in, and to get us on the same page in terms of what people are interested in learning. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to drop in the Zoom chat an answer to one of the 4 prompts below. So you can type a number of the prompts and then an answer to any of the 4. The first prompt is good UX writing. So if you have a favorite website that really shows good UX writing, it's easy to understand, it's easy to follow, drop a link to the webpage and tell us why. The second prompt is you in UX writing. So what do you know about UX writing or content strategy? What are some of your previous knowledges around this topic? Third is a learning goal. So what do you hope to learn during this workshop, and share more about that? And then finally is Merriam-Webster or a definition of plain language that you have right now. So I'll give everyone a couple of seconds to drop their answer in the chat, and then we'll go from there. Cool. I'm seeing a lot of awesome responses, and also makes me feel good about my outline that I wasn't wildly off base, because I think we're going to talk about a lot of things that people are mentioning. So looks like folks are interested in UX writing generally and might be new to the topic. I see a couple of designers who might be welcoming a writer to their team and want to collaborate with them, which is really awesome. I'm lucky to work with a great designer on my team, and we can chat about that. And then I see a couple of people how to advocate for plain language with stakeholders, which we'll talk about. And then a lot of people repeating that plain language is concise, easy to understand, really accessible, which are really good terms to get us started today. Cool. Perfect. Well, you're welcome to keep adding responses. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. But again, my name is Allie. I was already introduced, but I'm a content strategist at the University of Arizona Libraries. And there will be some interactive elements for our talk today, and the opportunity to put into practice some of the topics and themes that I'll be going over. This is kind of repeating. Yeah, I was a writing teacher for several years, and then I've been working at the library for the last couple of months. And I also wanted to share my writing philosophy, just to give a framework for how I think and talk about writing. So I think writing is collaborative and purposeful. So it's always going to involve people, and it's always going to get us to a specific and well-defined goal. And it also helps us understand and take action on new ideas. And I always add the action piece, because what's relevant and particular about creating content for the web is that you're not only explaining concepts or defining things, you're creating content in order to support people doing something on your website or in your product. you're always thinking about writing to facilitate action or engagement, which is a unique part of web content that might be different than other forms of writing. So our agenda today, we're going to shoot for this to be between 45 minutes and an hour. There'll be some opportunities to engage. So I want to start off with defining UX and content roles. As we mentioned, this is going to be our first talk in a series of talks about UX writing and content strategy, and people might be new to those terms. So I'll go over what some careers or roles in content might look like. And then we'll talk about what plain language is and why it matters. And then I'd like to share some plain language myths, some pushback that I've received when I've been trying to implement plain language, and how you might overcome those pushbacks and work with stakeholders to advocate for plain language throughout your team or organization. And then I'll have some tips on how you can review and revise content into plain language, from big picture to granular level sentence changes. And then we'll wrap up and do questions and resources. As I mentioned, there's going to be activities. I'm going to introduce the instructions when we get there, but it's a good idea to have a new browser window open somewhere on your phone or computer to participate. That's what you're going to need to engage. So if you want to get that ready, that'd be awesome. And I'll give instructions when we get there. We're going to save Q&A until the end, but if you don't want to forget your question or something comes up, feel free to drop it in the chat, and my co-organizers are going to be taking stock of questions, and we can always bring them up later. So. All right, cool. So this is a diagram of different roles that might work on a user experience team. So user experience broadly is thinking about how users engage and take action on a website or a product. A common team is thinking about research, design, and content, but you're always considering design, and you're always considering all the elements at any time. So a UX researcher is thinking about getting feedback and insights from users. So setting up usability testing, setting up interviews, and thinking about how we can gain insights from research and inform strategy or product decisions. A designer is thinking about the interface of a product or a website. So that is the graphic piece, but it's also thinking about the structure and setup of a website, how users are moving from one piece to another, how they're making decisions, how they're being presented information, and thinking about the flow of the work as well. And then content is really related to design, but instead of having a focus on maybe the graphic or visual elements, their focus is going to be on words and how that's contributing to or crafting the user experience. So content is not only adding sentences and actual language to web pages or features of a web product, it's thinking about how language actually shapes the user experience. So an example might be if you're creating a portal for staff to sign in to a workplace, thinking about, do you want to call that portal staff sign in or staff login? Why, and is that language consistent across the platforms that you're designing for? And then also can be related to brand and tone. It might work closely with marketing as well. So this table might be a little overwhelming, but I'll move quickly through it. If you're looking for content roles, there's probably 3 that would be likely to come up and are common. So I'm a content strategist. This is the one I'm most familiar with. Content strategist, you're really working with people and stakeholders, and you might even act as like a teacher or a trainer in a lot of your capacity. So when you create content, the content strategist might be a key person, but it's likely you're not the only person writing and creating content at your organization. So your job is to support others whose main job might not be a writer in creating content that's consistent with guidelines and structures that you're setting up. You're also thinking about the governance of content, meaning who makes final decisions about what gets published, what doesn't, who has a say, how are people collaborating, how are people revising and reviewing content before it's created, and then after it's up, how are people evaluating if it's still relevant or if it needs to be changed or adjusted later on, and keeping an inventory of what content exists on your site or in your product. And then you're also advocating for content with stakeholders throughout a variety of parts of your organization. So what you might produce as a content strategist are content and style guidelines. So this is where the overlap with marketing might happen. So you're thinking about what words and phrases and tone you'd like people to use across the site. Content audits, looking at what content currently exists, evaluating that to see if it's still relevant and still helpful, and recommending changes if not. And then if you are working with a team of other people who have permission to add content to your website or to your product, you might offer trainings and resources to support them and make sure that you have a similar philosophy and approach to creating content. So a UX writer is more focused on the micro copy of digital features or sections of a website. So they're thinking about what content or language is going to make the website or product function. So If you want someone to be able to purchase something, what is that button called? What sort of terminology are you using? If you're naming things in a menu or a main navigation, what words are you using? So they might be producing a shared terminology. So every brand is going to have words that they want to encourage people to use and words that are on their no list. So you're creating that list and justifying it to stakeholders. And then you're also really involved in writing error messages, buttons, calls to action, and confirmation messages. Really thinking about the beginning to end of the user experience as they access your research or purchase your product. A content designer, it sounds sort of silly to say design with words, but I think that's the closest way I could explain it, is you might work really closely with a UI UX designer and with a product or business manager. So you're thinking about if there's the business or organizational goal behind a product or a website, how do you translate that into content and make sure that you're moving the business goal forward with the content that you're creating? So you might be thinking about customer journey maps, how a customer is learning about your product, to how they're using it, to how they're coming back or evaluating it. And then you're also thinking about a content ecosystem, which is basically the holistic picture of your content. So if you create one new piece of content, does that mean you have to revise these other pages? Does this mean you have to eliminate other pages? Do you have to create additional content to support that content? You're thinking about the larger ecosystem in which content creates to make sure that everything that you create makes sense and is not going to be left in isolation when a user moves through your website or through your product. But I have all those fancy words, but in my experience, content people do all of the things. I've had a variety of title and I've had to do bits and pieces of everything and just sort of had to be flexible. So I'd recommend reading and learning about Christina Halverson. She's sort of the godmother of content strategy and has a lot of really great blog posts and a podcast around content strategy and the different facets of that. But what she says is that content strategy, content design, UX writing are sets of activities and areas of accountability. They're not these like really formal job titles that are precious or immovable. So I like areas of accountability because really as a content strategist or someone who works in content, you're thinking about a variety of people who may or may not be familiar with content. You're thinking about how to empower and encourage them to create good content that's user-centered and how to advocate for that throughout your organization. I do write in my job, but more often than not, I'm talking to other people about writing and trying to make the case for that. So that's a big part of the role. And then at any time, you can be doing more design-centered focused work. You can be doing more micro copy work, or really just working with stakeholders and doing the people-oriented parts of things. And that can sort of shift depending on the project and what you're focused on. So that's kind of a quick introduction to UX writing and content strategy and content design. There's a lot of people who have really smart definitions and takes on that I encourage you to look after. And then we're hoping to cover more of that in our series. So today we're really focused on plain language, which is one aspect or one tool that can facilitate an effective content strategy or an effective content design. So a quick definition of plain language is that, as a lot of you already mentioned, is clear, easy to understand writing. So it's simple, it's to the point, you're not using a lot of jargon or complicated terminology. You're thinking about how to write something in a simple, clear-cut way and communicate your message as succinctly as possible. I mentioned that it's both accessible and usable, which go hand in hand, but have maybe different focuses. So by accessible, I mean, when you're writing, you're not only creating content for users who are reading your content, you're also thinking about other ways people might experience your content through screen readers, through audio. So you're thinking about a holistic user experience and how to center users with disabilities as well. And usable means, back to my original point about writing, that you want people not only to read and understand your content, but to use your content to take action. You want someone to sign up for your newsletter or purchase your product or sign up for your service. And you want to facilitate that process through clear content. I'd also like to add that it's iterative. It can be really intimidating to have this framework of plain language because it can feel like you're never enough or it's never going to be good enough. But small changes go a long way, and you can always revise and change as you learn more about the user and as you learn more about the product or the site that you're managing. So don't be overwhelmed. You can do a lot of small things to make baby steps towards more plain language in your content. And then again, the reason why plain language is important, which we'll talk about as we move through this workshop, is to make your web content understandable to users of all backgrounds, all education levels, all languages, whether they've heard about your product or website for the first time or they're a repeat user. It's an inclusive framework to invite more people in to be able to use your web content or product. And then again, clearly and succinctly are common words that you want to think about when writing plain language. So this is what not to do. We're going to start off with some scary content. And so I also want to show this to show why the stakes are high for incorporating plain language into your website. So this is the City of Tucson court website. And I was floating around here today and I clicked on the link to court language access, assuming that it might provide information if I need a translator, or what my rights are if my first language is something other than English, or to provide information about bilingual materials. And what I got was none of that. Instead, it's a lot of legal writing that hasn't been translated. It's policy. It doesn't necessarily say anything about how this would play out in your experience going through the court system. And there are helpful links, but those are again pointing back to policy and legal documents. There's no resources or ways to find out how you could get assistance if you want some sort of language support in the court. So I work at a library and I'm always thinking about the student experience and how to support students going through their education experience, but plain language can really have really high stakes in terms of people being able to access services that might be really important. And this not using plain language can be a barrier and actually prevent someone from getting the resources and the access that they need in the case of thinking about the court system. So we're gonna move on to positive examples. Actually, one more note about this. In addition just to the language itself, you also see long, dense paragraphs, complicated phrases, and there's just kind of a wall of text, which is something that we want to think about avoiding when we set up plain language. I'm going to go through a couple of positive examples, and I also have annotations about why I think they're effective. So this is the National Health Service website based out of the UK. So this is a message that we've probably all seen a version of when you're getting your request to accept cookies when you go to a website, tracking your analytics and your data. And this is one of the better ones that I've seen. So there's a clear and direct heading. We know what this message is about. They're not sort of hiding what content that they're creating for us. They explain what's happening. So they're explaining what analytics cookies are. They're telling us what they would like to do with them and what they would use that information for. So it's giving us some background information so we can make an informed decision as a user. They also have a link to find out more information if you want to read more. And then we have two options that are two buttons, and both of the writing on both of these buttons is really clear. It's either you're okay with the cookies or you're requesting that they don't use your cookies. And those are both straightforward plain language versions of what a button can look like. This is Northwestern Mutual. If you're thinking about getting a financial advisor and finding one who's a good fit for you, I like that. I'm sure that their actual process behind the scenes is really complicated. There's a lot of logic and algorithms and thinking about how they might match someone, but they've just presented the bare bones of what the user needs to know in a clear format that provides important information. They also address the user as you. So they're saying, we have the right expertise for your goals, which makes it more conversational and like you're writing, like you're speaking. They also have the option for you to look up a financial advisor if you have someone that it was recommended to you or if you're already working with someone. So they're not assuming that all users are finding an advisor for the first time. Some users might have some background information that they want to use to facilitate a search experience. So they have a little description that explains what you can do and how you can use the search function, which helps the search be more usable. And finally, this is the immigration page from Canada.gov. And so immigration is an intimidating and complex experience, but they've simplified it down into some of the main actions you might want to take when entering Canada. So they have simple verbs and nouns as their headers. If you want to immigrate, you can clearly find what page might be around immigration, same for visiting or working in the country. They also provide previews of what will happen when you go to the next page. So if you're navigating, you're not quite sure where you want to go, there's a quick summary of what's happening on the next page, and that can help you decide whether that's the right decision for you or not. So together, the clear headers and the description facilitate your decision-making process and give insights into if you're in the right place or not, which can reduce stress and overwhelm for the user as they're navigating your content. So essentially, I like to think about if you're implementing language and thinking about how it fits into your content strategy, I think you need two tools, both a magnifying glass and a telescope. So magnifying glass is you are going to have to get into the nitty-gritty language level, sentence level stuff and think about changing words, changing sentence structure, reducing the amount of content that you're producing to simplify your messaging. So you're really going to need to magnify on the content itself. But I also would argue that you need a telescope to look at the big picture of the entire user experience of your product or your site. So this is encouraging you to think through the consistency, design, and flow of your website and product. So you can use a really simple term, but if you're using a different name for the same item throughout your website, it's going to be confusing to users. We're redesigning the borrowed technology part of the library website, and we realized we were sometimes referring to technology as devices, sometimes referring to them as items or materials. So even though those are all simple terms, if we are referring to the same thing by 3 different names, that doesn't really help the user. So you also need to have a lens that's thinking about the consistency of your terminology across the pages or features of your product. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a bit and invite people to participate. I'll drop this website and the code into the chat so you can copy and paste it. But you're going to go to menti.com. It's an interactive, it'll look like a PowerPoint slide. There'll be a prompt that you'll be able to add your response to, and then I'll be able to show the responses on a slide as they populate. And essentially the prompt is going to be, we've talked about some definitions and explanations of plain language. So I'm going to ask folks to share your own. So let me go to Mentimeter. So you're going to get a slide that looks like this, and I'll ask you to add your definition of plain language. And again, you're going to go to menti.com, and then the code is 14161409. I'll give folks a few minutes to contribute. I'll give folks about 1 more minute. Cool. These are awesome. And I'm glad that someone brought up white space. One thing that we'll talk about is that plain language can also be about formatting your content. So instead of having long, dense paragraphs that have a lot of words, it's breaking those up and having white space or plain space in between your content as well. And that can make your content a lot more accessible. But yeah, people are iterating simple, clear, accessible, and action-oriented. Cool. Let me go back to. So I'm going to take a step back and talk about how plain language is actually about working with people and making the case for plain language. And this can be, I think plain language has a role, even if you don't have a formal UX writing or content strategy title. Most of us are creating content every day, whether that's in our internal team spaces where we're trying to organize documents and workflows, or if you're creating presentations or informational resources for people in your job. A lot of us care about content, even if you don't have a formal UX writing role. So I think the more advocates for plain language that we have in organizations, the better. And we can all learn how to be advocates to incorporate plain language in our content. So I wanted to go through a couple of myths. These have come from pushback I've received when I've been advocating for plain language or simpler language in projects. So folks might say that websites and products need complex language to explain complex information. And I get where people are coming from, because oftentimes this is coming from people feeling really attached to the service or the product or the program that they've designed. And they want to make sure that everything that they have thought about is reflected on the website and that people are getting the scope and the scale of what they've achieved. But there can be a myth that just because a program or a resource or a product feature is complicated, that the only possible way that we could document that on the website is using really complicated, really dense language. So my argument would be that users want and need web content that is quick and accessible to understand. And effective content actually breaks down complex information into clear words and chunks. And that translating work of taking something that you might be hearing about for the first time and figuring out how to translate that for a broader audience is actually, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of skill. And ultimately, you want people who have heard about your product or your resource for the first time to be able to read a web page or read a blurb on an app and kind of get the gist of what you're doing. You don't want to intimidate or scare people away. So if you hear this, I would make the argument that there are ways to set up the content that's still clear, like that will explain the range of what your product or feature can do, but is still accessible. But another way, if someone is more data oriented, is to share research about cognitive load and time on task. So cognitive load is referring to everyone has sort of a limit of what they're able to take in. It's kind of like information overload. And so if there's a lot of dense content or a lot of things that people need to remember all at once, people are likely to forget or get frustrated and exit out of your website or exit out of your product and never finish the transaction or the workflow that they were working on. So it actually can lose users, which might be compelling to someone from a business or leadership angle. You also consider time on task if you're doing some user research. You can show that long or dense or complicated phrases is actually slowing down users and making it less likely that they're getting to the meat of where you want to get them to go. And they're taking a lot of time to complete tasks where we could actually reduce that time. So bringing in those metrics might be a way to facilitate understanding that you can articulate complex ideas while using simple language. This is the one that I've gotten the most, that plain language is dumbed down or too simplistic. Maybe it's being in academia, but there is an association that plain language means that it's not good writing, and that sophisticated or jargony writing is actually a demonstration of how good of a writer that you are. And I would argue that plain language is actually strategic and intentional. You're thinking about the audience, you're thinking about the goal of your product or website, you're thinking about the user experience. So it's not simplistic, but it's actually informed, and you're navigating a lot of different decision metrics in how you're setting up your content. And then I think more importantly is that when you call language dumbed down, you're actually perpetuating harmful stereotypes and assumptions about your users. That saying that if certain people can't access certain content, that they're not, it's at the fault of the user. When we actually want to think about if someone's not accessing your service or product, it's an issue with the product or the website, not with the user's ability. So it can really perpetuate an ableist and harmful view of the user as well. So if you hear this, I would first start with empathy. I've learned that often this gut reaction might be this might be covering other concerns or anxieties that folks are having, meaning that they want to make sure that the work that they're creating is coming across as quality and that we're representing the mission and the work of what they're doing in an effective way. So I would begin by kind of asking questions about why they're concerned about this. I might get at deeper concerns that are actually facilitating that. And then I would also share research about average reading levels. I think we have an assumption that the average reading level of our users is a lot higher than it actually is. And sharing actual research and statistics about what reading levels are common might help provide some education and some understanding when you're facilitating this type of conversation. And third, and this one I think is definitely the trickiest because there are real content constraints based on, I don't want to, if anyone works in these teams, it's not a dig, these happen to be the folks that might bring up some concerns or mandate certain types of content, people who work in legal or compliance or HR teams, because there are real legal concerns about what type of content needs to be created and what words or phrases you can or cannot use. So I totally get that, and there really might be legitimate constraints that you're not able to revise or work around. But I would ask to think about if we can still think about formatting and the design of the content. So even if we're not able to change the actual language into simpler, easier to understand language, we might be able to use formatting to at least chunk and explain and make more digestible long sections of content. So that's things like adding headers between sections that might be subtitles that will explain what that section is about. You might have more flexibility, use plain language in your headers, using bullet points to outline long lists or resources. And then if you're able to define key terms, I always like linking out to a resource that would explain that key term. So if you have a particular term that's really rooted in legal jargon, can you explain it or link out to a resource that might define that for the user if you can't change the terminology itself? So if you're working with these teams and you're hearing some constraints and some pushback against how much you might be able to revise content, I would ask about the audience. Is there flexibility in how we address the audience? Can we use the second person you? Can we at least define the audience clearly to make sure that we can think about that piece of it? I would also make sure that as a content person that you understand the key terms that are a part of this content. You have an understanding that might allow you to recommend synonyms, that might allow you to create effective headers or bullet points, making sure that you understand the terms at hand can help you provide supportive content that might define or explain those concepts. And then always advocate for chunking if all else fails. Add returns, add white space in between paragraphs. And if you can't change the sentences themselves, at least avoid 7 or 8 line long paragraphs and think about how you can at least break up the visual display of your content. So I know those don't encompass everything, and there's a lot of different strategies that you might take to sort of advocate for plain language, but those are things I've heard. And I hope even thinking about how you might reframe that in response to a stakeholder who says that, and thinking about what sort of data or strategies you might incorporate are helpful for folks who might be in that position. And I think this is more see-through than I thought, sorry. But I think my ultimate argument is that using plain language invites more people in and supports them as they use your website or your product. I don't see plain language as an impediment or as something that's not showing the sophistication of your work. I see it as an invitation that might support people to come use your product. And it's really an invitation or a tool to facilitate that experience. And yeah, this is really like the hill I will die on, is that using plain language isn't a threat to the value, worth, or sophistication of your work. It's actually it's exemplary that you understand what you're doing and you're able to convey that in a way that's user-centered. It's a skill and it's a tactic that's necessary towards creating an inclusive site or product. So that's my soapbox for right now. But those are some talking points that I've come up with. I think this might be a good time, no matter what role that you're in, if you're thinking about creating effective content, what talking points you might come up with to talk to the stakeholders in your organization. So you're going to be back on the same website. I'll change the slide in just one second. If you're getting an error message that I'm not on the right slide, I'll do that right now. And you're going to share a talking point that you'd use to get people from your organization on board with plain language if you're getting some pushback or some people thinking different thoughts about plain language. So let me go to the next slide. Okay, so you now should be able to, using the same website and the same code, offer your response, a talking point that you might use to convince a stakeholder in your organization or on your team to use plain language. I'll give folks a couple of minutes to add, and then we'll review and move on. Yeah, I've totally been there where I'm working on a team and I look at how our team is represented on the website and I have no idea what it's talking about and I'm on that team. So yeah, I feel that pain. Ooh, I love the airplane one too. Cool. Yeah, I think using the concept of an elevator speech can be a helpful metaphor too that people might be familiar with. Cool. Yeah, I love the connection back to UX researcher. I think it's always great if you have real user insights, both qualitative and quantitative, to back up this claim. That's always awesome and always effective. And then I see a lot of people connecting it back to business objectives, that you're going to get more interaction, more engagement, more purchases. And then also the more empathetic human perspective that we want people to be able to understand and use this regardless of their background. Cool. These are great. And I will, in addition to sharing my PowerPoint slides, I can also share this slide with the responses. So if you want to take note of these talking points for later, I can also share this because these are really great. Cool. Okay, so this is kind of the last third of my talk for today and focusing on how to workshop or review your content. I'm going to start with sort of big picture, kind of thinking about the collaborative, people-oriented part of this. And then I'll end with sort of like sentence level quick tips that can make a big difference in a short amount of time. So I just kind of went through this myself, so it's fresh on the brain, but sometimes workshopping content means that there's conflicting perspectives or conflicting opinions about what the content should be doing, if the content should exist, if it shouldn't exist. And so I've learned that sometimes you need to step away from the content itself. It's like a hot potato, and you just need to like put the hot potato down and go back to like get your oven mitts, and then you can deal with it. And so I think it's helpful, especially when you're working with people who have different perspectives, is to go back to the big picture of what you want users to do and how you want them to do it and get away from the actual writing itself. And so there's a lot of tools that are really common in UX research that I think can be adapted to a content process. So the 4Ls retrospective, asking people what they like, what they learned, what they longed for, or what they lacked. You can use that as a review framework for your content. So what do we like about the content? Are there positive things that we have consensus on? What have people learned from this process of creating content about their product or about your service that we want to make sure that we highlight? What are you longing for? What's missing? And then last, what's straight up something we haven't even considered that we should be considering? So I think this could be a review framework for your content as well that might invite people to contribute and provide feedback. Journey mapping is thinking about the beginning to end of the user experience. So you might want to go back and map out, okay, like, oh, we wanted someone to be able to sign up for our email list before they got the discount, right? Is our content actually doing that, or did we forget about some step of the user journey? So that can be a way to highlight gaps based in the user experience. And then empathy mapping is similar. What are some pain points, what emotions or experiences are coming up for folks, and how can we address that in the content that we're creating? So I created a FigJam, which Figma is a design tool when you can create these interactive whiteboards that people can contribute. It's a good way for remote work to facilitate kind of interactive interactions. And so I was working on creating a page that was supporting instructors. And there are two teams at the library that support instructors and have they have different ideas about what that looks like and what should be prioritized in the content. And so I was thinking about how to facilitate a conversation with people who are both dedicated to supporting instructors, but might have different ideas about what that looks like, what terms should be used, and how we talk about instructor support. So we weren't getting very far with looking at the actual content because it was too charged. So I decided to take a step back and think about more about their role and what they do on their team, how they support the organization. And I invited both of them in their own words to sort of contribute to that. And then we saw overlapping similarities and also divergences that could help us organize and create our content. And then from their point of view, what are some top tasks? What are some FAQs that they get from instructors? How can we address those? And then what do they want users to be able to find and do on our website? Ideally, you would also do a version of this with actual users, but I think it's helpful to talk to stakeholders as well. And then we also took the time to kind of agree upon and map out next steps, so that everyone has clarity about what is happening next with the content that you're revising, that you're creating. So my next tip about reviewing your content is I found that it's helpful to set clear expectations about the type of feedback that you're providing and to define key terms up front so that everyone knows kind of what you're talking about when you're using a term. When you start the project, even before you get to the content creation or the content revision or review phase, what are the key terms for the product or feature or service or events that you're working on? And can you get consensus on those terms up front so we know what we're talking about? I'd also recommend setting, when you're getting to the feedback point, so the content has been created and you're bopping it around for different points of view to give some feedback, setting expectations about what type of feedback that you want and what type of feedback you expect to get. It's a bad holdover from writing teacher days that someone has asked me to take a look at their content. I go through line edits and I'm kind of like totally rewriting the sentence level and they just wanted me to check that it was accurate. And then then I did too much feedback when they didn't actually want that feedback, and it can create some tension that didn't need to be there. So setting expectations about what type of feedback that you're providing and why can help alleviate some of that tension when you're collaborating on content. And then you also want to reference content and style guidelines and maybe even design systems if you're collaborating with designers as well, early and often, because you wouldn't want to use a phrase and then find out too late that that's actually a phrase that we're not recommending using in our brand and style guidelines. So being aware earlier so you don't make unnecessary revision work for yourself later. So I've been drafting this. We haven't implemented it yet, but kind of like a feedback framework that I might send out to stakeholders when I'm either requesting feedback from them or offering or providing feedback to them as a content strategist. So you can identify what type of feedback, which there's different points and different types of feedback that might happen depending how far into the content creation process that you're at. So do you want someone to simplify the language for you? Do you want people to do kind of line edits and grammar checks? Are you asking a stakeholder just for fact check, like is the content, is it correct, and looking for accuracy? Is it editorial? Are you worried about the tone or the style of the content, wanting some feedback on that? Or is it formatting and design? Do you want to see if there's a better way we could structure and set up this content? Or is it multiple of these? You also might want to drop the key terms and definitions that you had at the beginning of the project. It might be helpful to put them here so everyone knows why you use those terms and how you're using them. We've started to create kind of words that we don't recommend or we want to avoid because we don't think they're rooted in plain language. So you can put those there too to create transparency about these are words that we're actively trying to avoid as an organization. So I know a big one for our team is utilize. You can just say use, you don't need utilize. And then my pet peeve in working in higher education is any sort of strive to, because you can just say the student wants or the teacher needs. We don't need striving, but I can talk about that another time. And then we can also address people more directly using you instead of the student. And then you might link to resources so that you want people to consult or reference or to back up your work. And then you might, as you start implementing plain language into your work, you can create a checklist of things that have worked well for you. It doesn't need to be that rigid. You don't always need to be doing all of the things on this checklist, but it can be a good kind of mental note of like, oh yeah, I should check if I could use more contractions, or oh yeah, I could check the verbs and see if there's a way to simplify those. It can be a good reminder for you to use as you're kind of reviewing feedback or reviewing content. And then finally, this is sort of the sentence level approach of there's a lot of different things that you can focus on. These are things that I tend to prioritize and come back to. So one are contractions. You can make verbs or verb phrases shorter and more conversational. This is a way to write like you speak and make it more engaging. It's not always appropriate, especially depending on what type of product you're working on. It might be too casual, but I think there are ways to incorporate it. So you might try, we won't charge extra fees instead of we will not charge extra fees. Simple verbs. So again, I'm already bringing back my strives to example because, and so you might try something like the University of Arizona Library support students instead of something like the University of Arizona Libraries strives to cultivate a culture of belonging to empower students to achieve. This is everywhere in higher education when we could be a lot simpler and clearer. And this is also good. Any sort of verb that I call them filler verbs. So they're verbs that set up, there's probably a more technical term that I don't, but it's a verb that's setting up another verb. So we could have just said the libraries cultivate, but it's like that strives to where you're almost like you're prepping the other verb. So that can be a good way to edit your content and be like, okay, I can just have one verb. I don't need to have like the filler verb on top of the actual verb. And then can we also change cultivate into something simpler while we're at it? And then lastly, active voice, which I think Bob mentioned in the chat as well. So you want to start with the person or the thing that's doing the action. It'll almost always save you actual words. It tends to be shorter. So Carlos taught the class instead of the class was taught by Carlos. Can be a way to sort of like double check your content and simplify it. So I wanted to provide an example that I worked on with a teammate of mine. So we were improving the user search experience when people are looking for a book or a film. If they put in a title and there was nothing, we had nothing in the library, the before on the left panel, this is the message that they got. It's not horrible, but it puts the burden of the error on the user that they didn't search the right thing instead of legitimately we might not have something and we didn't really provide that as an option. So we were blaming the user. And we also didn't provide alternatives. So we kind of were like, well, you didn't find the item, you're kind of out of luck. And we didn't provide another opportunity for them to engage with our service. So those are the two revision goals. And so we simplified suggestions into want to search again, because we wanted to say like, maybe we can encourage them to try another search and adjust some of their searching practices. We simplified some of the languages, like search scope might be helpful for a librarian, but might not be super familiar to an undergraduate student. So we can just say search instead. And then we also added a new section that had relevant resources. So if you're still not finding something that's not coming up, we actually have ways to get items from other libraries and other institutions that we weren't highlighting. So why not point users to those resources so they can still get access to the items that they need, and we can still help them. And this is also kind of a good example that sometimes incorporating plain language makes your example longer or makes your content longer. So we actually ended up adding more content here, which is not inherently bad. I think as long as you're thinking about the format of the content and if it's meeting a user goal or question, sometimes you do need more content to facilitate that need. And that is not inherently anti-plain language. Okay, so now this is kind of the last task, and I'll give people a longer chunk of time to work on this. But we're going to use the same tool, so same menti.com with the same code. I have an example that Bob, my colleague, actually provided that's from Costco. So I think this notice was posted up in a Costco and was trying to talk about if you wanted to sort of provide an alternative to the price that you saw for a product, try to provide an opportunity, like for explaining what that process would look like. But I'll read it out loud and it's confusing. So the member notice reads, Costco will make available a pen and paper to anyone who wants to write down prices. Should you find an item with the wrong sign on it, we will allow you to buy one quantity of the item in question with a price adjustment not to exceed $50. I've read this several times and I'm still not quite sure I know what it means. So I'm now challenging the rest of you to figure out if you can understand what it means and to write a better version using some of the plain language tactics that we've talked about. So some questions to help you seek understanding about what the content is saying here might be, what does this notice want the customer to do? What is the most important information and how can we prioritize that? And what words or phrases can you simplify or rewrite? So I'm going to give everyone several minutes to work on this, and then you're going to add your revised answer to the last slide of our interactive PowerPoint when you're ready. And then if people want, I've written out the version so you can copy and paste this into your Word document or Google Doc. Oh, it's a Tucson example. Wow. Okay. All right, cool. So folks have a couple of minutes to work on rewriting this, and then we will touch base. Sorry, I realized I went away from the actual text. Put this up. And I also dropped the text in chat a little bit ago. Redo that. I'm going to go back to the Mentimeter just to check, but if people want this prompt back up, let me know, and I'm happy to switch back. These are good. Cool. Okay. Cool. It would be awesome if anyone, either through the chat or if you want to go unmute your mic, could someone share a bit about their process, what you thought about, and how you approached rewriting this? I'd love to hear someone sort of explain their thought process and what they came up with.
Yeah, so I can share a little bit. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what I said. I don't think mine's showing up for some reason, which is fine. But I took like a slightly different approach than like a pen and paper. I thought maybe people might have their phones easily on them. And so I actually suggested maybe taking a photo and presenting the
Ooh,
photo to the cashier. Um, and then
wow.
explaining that it was for one item and that it wouldn't exceed a $50 difference. So
Cool.
yeah, mine was just a different take than pen and paper.
Well, I like that because I think you're right that more people are probably walking around the store with their phone than they might with pen and paper. And taking a photo is like a great user-centered response. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to add or share what they wrote?
I think I just appreciated that comment because when you're like super in a project, you can get stuck on like, okay, how do we phrase the pen and paper? We got to figure out like pen and paper and stuck on this idea that doesn't even need to be there. Like, how about we look at the pen and the paper? Maybe we don't need that at all. So I've definitely been trapped in one of those whirlwinds. So just having someone else's perspective to be like, the pen and paper, maybe we don't need it at all. Like, it's helpful perspective.
Yeah, and I've been in that project space a million times where you like have gone back and forth on like one sentence a million times, and then someone's like, wait, do we even like need this sentence? Like, is it actually like, do we even need to talk about this? And so sometimes, yeah, it's not only transcribing or editing what you actually have, but taking the bigger picture about like questioning if the content that you have, if it's the right content, or if there's new content that you should be creating that might be more appropriate for the use case that you're designing for. So that's super helpful. Okay, I'm going to go back one last time, and I really appreciate all your guys' things, and all those channels were super helpful. So I appreciate that. I know I made you guys write at like 5:38 on a Thursday afternoon, so it was a bold decision, and you guys stepped up to the plate. So I wanted to do a quick wrap up before we move on to Q&A. To summarize, plain language is a tool to explain complex information to users of all backgrounds. I like framing it as a tool because it can look a variety of ways. You can incorporate a variety of practices or approaches to make plain language, but ultimately it's just facilitating a positive or useful user experience. And then I think before you get started creating content or editing content, good questions you might want to ask yourself are, does this content answer questions about my organization or project? Is it providing information that is relevant and useful to the user, not just documenting what we do, but actually in a way that's helpful, but creating content that people actually want to know and use, and then being sort of strategic in what you consider putting out on your website or on your product. Does it provide clear information about what your organization offers users? Is it clear and succinct? Can you, as the person on that team, understand what your website is saying about your own team? That's a good first test. And then finally, does it help users take action? Meaning, can it help them find a resource, attend an event, purchase an item, and are we supporting them in that process? Should always be the ultimate goal. So yeah, I wanted to thank you for your time. I'll provide other resources. These are just some initial ones that I really like. HubSpot has like a blog post about how to simplify your writing, kind of from a marketing point of view, but would still be helpful for UX, I think. I love Intuit's accessibility and inclusion guide, thinking about incorporating anti-racist and other inclusive language into your frameworks. And then the readability analysis tool can give you kind of a readability score of your content and give you some data around that if you need hard numbers to justify plain language. But I want to open up the Q&A either through Zoom or if you want to go off mic. And if you also need to head out, that's totally okay. And I just wanted to say thank you for your time. This is my first time facilitating a workshop, so I really appreciate you all coming and engaging, and hopefully you learned something. And I will. Okay, so I see one about how well do contractions work when you translate locally or localize your content into another language? Any limitations to keep in mind? That's a really good point, is contractions are really English centric. So they either don't exist or wouldn't necessarily work in the same way in other languages. So I think about, instead of just thinking about contractions as kind of like a straightforward, or that you're always going to sort of like merge verbs, is there another way that's relevant to that language that you could shorten? Because that's really the goal of a contraction, is to sort of shorten or simplify a verb phrase. So are there culturally or linguistically relevant ways to do that in the language that you're working in? So a contraction is one way, but there are likely others to remove filler verbs, or to think about simpler terms or more direct forms of phrasing. So I'm not bilingual, but I said that would be one approach I would think about. Yeah. Someone said, wondering if there's a different style you would write for younger versus older users. That's a good question. I mean, I think, your audience does matter if you're writing for teens or if you're writing for a more child-oriented audience. I do think I would think that probably would affect your tone more than it would affect your use of plain language. I think plain language doesn't inherently have like a younger or older sounding tone. It's thinking about a concise way to frame a message. But if you're thinking about younger versus older audience, I would think about like maybe the types of words you're using, the tone of phrase, the style of your content. It'd be more of an editorial decision, I think, than whether or not you're using plain language, because I think plain language is relevant for every age group. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. Well, I think we can wrap up. Brittany, Caroline, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so
Cool.
much, Allie. And thank you everyone for joining us on this Thursday. And sounds like everyone got something out of it. Thanks for interacting with us. And yeah, we're hoping to do a series and do a few more little aspects of content design, UX writing, all that stuff. So thanks again. Follow us on Meetup, Slack, LinkedIn, and hope to see some of you next time. Have a good evening.
Thank you so
thank you,
much.
guys.
Or day. Sorry. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Great job, Allie.
Thank you.
Woo.
Woo. Thank you guys for all your help and support.
No, it was really fun.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it was like my son, he's 5. He said a few days ago, like, I wish all words were 3-letter words or something like that. I was like,
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I guess I understand that desire, but I mean, we could have longer words, but yeah, I don't know.